Be awesome. So, as I think I talked when I started off a little bit about my inspiration for this whole thing is really my wife, and my wife is part of a bigger group of people called parents, right? And a subgroup of that called women and moms. And as we went through this, one of the things that kept coming up, and it actually has come up through a lot of the sessions this morning, is really like moms are really the superheroes of healthcare in a lot of ways, right? You will generally not find a mom who says, "Oh well, I guess there's nothing else I can do for my kid," right? Or there's nothing else I can do for my parent. That just doesn't exist, right? So moms will do whatever they can, over every stone that they could possibly turn over. So when I put the panel together, I actually tried to think of who's the right person to host. And the first person I thought of was Beth Lambert, who's actually going to be facilitating the panel. Beth is, outside of a friend to myself and my family, Beth has started a number of nonprofits. She's basically devoted her life to helping people understand that children can recover from chronic illnesses and how. So she was the perfect person to do this. So before I hand the microphone to her, one quick reminder, we'd still love people to do those commitment postcards if you can and hang them up on the wall. That would be great. So thank you, and Beth.
Great. Thanks, Bert. So we are here with a panel of incredible moms, and part of the reason they are here is because they are individuals who, like Susanna you heard before, and some other stories you've heard, who, when faced with adversity or challenges, health challenges in their own families, they decided that that was a time to change. It served as a catalyst for change, a time, an opportunity for them to fix something that was broken. So what I'd like to do first is just have, I'll introduce each of our panelists, and then I'd like to have them each say a little bit about their story and what it was that brought them to this place where they became health advocates and change makers. So we have with us today Amy Gleason, who is the mother of Morgan Gleason, who you heard from earlier today, the famous patient advocate now. And she's also the founder of CareSync. And we also have Dr. Madiha Saeed, who is an integrative physician and mom to 4 boys under 8. And she's also known as Holistic Mom MD, which you'll hear more about that in a minute. And she's also an author of a book coming out in October. And we also have Jennifer Guistra-Kozek, who is also a mom, but also author of a book called Healing Without Hurting. And she's also a board member of my nonprofit organization, Epidemic Answers. So each one of them will tell you a little bit more. Maybe we'll start with you, Amy, and you can tell us about your story and how you got to be the change maker that you are.
Okay, great. So there are kind of 2 main things that I think I'd like to talk about. One is CureJM Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and one is CareSync. So a little bit about the story kind of starts with the day Morgan was diagnosed, and we were at the dermatologist that she told the story earlier, and the doctor actually started crying when she gave us the diagnosis, and she had a daughter, I guess, about Morgan's age, and it's the first time she'd ever diagnosed the rare disease. And so I didn't want to ask any questions in front of Morgan because I didn't know what she was going to say. And so in the car, I'm quickly Googling on my phone, like, what is this thing, And so later that night, she was actually supposed to go to summer camp, away camp, that Sunday. It was Friday at that time, and they had gotten us an appointment for a pediatric rheumatologist, and this was June 18th, actually almost her 7-year diagnosis anniversary, and they got us an appointment for September 30th. So they told us she had this life-threatening disease. By the way, you can see somebody in 3 months. Good luck. So, as a mom does, I started Googling, and when I didn't like what I read on the first page, I read the second page, and read the third page, and read the fourth page until I got to there were no more pages. And one of those pages was the CureJM Foundation, and they had a message board. So I went on the message board and said, hey, my kid just got diagnosed today, and she's supposed to go to summer camp on Sunday. What should I do? Seems kind of silly now, but at the time, I posted that out there, and a mom within an hour reached out to me and said, my daughter's had this disease since she was 3. She's 15 now. Give me your phone number. I'll call you. So she's like, get a piece of paper. I'm going to give you a lot of information. And so she kind of told me all the important stuff, like not forever, but for that day. And one of the things was there's a JM expert in Chicago, and you should go see her. And by the way, here's her email address. Okay. So I emailed her Friday night at 8:30 at night, and she responded within an hour and said, we'll see you on July 19th, and you can send her to summer camp. I'm like, okay, wow, this was pretty cool. All in a couple hours, I've gotten all this information that my doctor couldn't give me. He had never even seen a patient with her disease. And so that was a really great way that I got introduced to the Cure-JM Foundation, which is really a network of parents trying to find a cure and providing support. So I'm involved in the board of that, and we fund our own research because there's not a lot of money for rare disease research or figuring out clinical trials and that kind of stuff. So that's one thing that got me involved with that. And then as Morgan went from having one doctor to seeing 12 doctors across 6 health systems in 3 states, none of those doctors talked to each other. And as they were just saying on the last panel, they didn't share any information. So she had all these different versions of her medical record. They all had different medication lists, different problem lists, different everything. And so I made this binder that I carried with me from visit to visit to visit, because every visit starts with, so tell me what happened since the last time you were here. I'm like, really? That's a lot of doctors and a lot of visits and a lot of hospitalizations. And so I'd start pulling out labs. So wait, she just had that lab. Oh wait, she doesn't need a CT scan. She just had one, and all this. I had this binder with me everywhere. So I had worked for electronic medical records for most of my career, and I was a nurse by background. So I was like, there has to be an easier way that we can put this electronically and patients can share it with their families and their doctors. But the biggest challenge wasn't just getting electronically. There were tools to do that, but it was having the help to be able to do that. So we have a team of health assistants at CareSync. We founded a company called CareSync. I guess I skipped that part. And at CareSync, my co-founders and I, we created this team where we have not just the technology, but we have a team of health assistants and nurses that help you coordinate your care, get your information, summarize your information into a shareable format so you can just give a summary. Doctors generally won't read 1,000 pages of records if you dump them on their door at a visit, surprisingly. But they will read a summary if you can get it summarized. And so we help patients make appointments, we find social resources, get wheelchair ramps installed so the patient can stay in their home, find medication copay assistance programs, get patients signed up for bubble pack delivery services, all kinds of things like that. And so really Morgan was the reason that we started that company.
It's such an incredible story, and there's 2 things I want to circle back on, so don't let me forget. One is the mom network that you referenced early on, and the second thing is the creation, the innovation that came out of it too. So I'm going to put a bookmark on those because I want to make sure we get each of your stories. So Madiha, why don't you go ahead and share your story?
Hello, I am Dr. Madiha Saeed, a board-certified integrative holistic family physician. I am also an author. Oh, okay, there we go now. I have a book coming out in October, and I'm also the mom of 4 boys, as Beth alluded to earlier. And I am still a mother, even though with all that testosterone running around, I'm really surprised I haven't developed male external genitalia. But, but otherwise, my story starts with, I was born and raised in Naperville. I've been here in this country all my life. And I graduated residency in South Bend, Indiana, from residency in 2010. From there, I was also sick. I was, went to specialist, and we'll talk about a little bit earlier our healing story. But and when I was unable to heal myself, because I'm like, what is going on here? Going to specialist, and I'm a doctor, right? Like I should have the answers. And when I couldn't heal myself, I then continued to search and look for alternative healing opportunities. Right after residency, I joined a practice where there was me, an OBGYN, an internist, an exercise physiologist, nutritionist, counseling, chiropractor, massage therapy, all under one roof. Homeopath, like everything under one roof. And literally what I learned then was we were never taught in residency or medical school what we really needed to know to keep somebody healthy and happy. And so when all of these mothers, and I think 1 or 2 fathers, but all of these mothers literally blessed me with all this wisdom and knowledge that conventional medicine had left behind, I was able to then use that on myself along with all my patients, and I have now almost 100% success rate in healing disease and improving symptoms just with simple lifestyle strategies and addressing deficiencies. So since then, I became even more passionate. My Facebook page is Holistic Mom MD because, again, as a mother of young children and trying to, keep myself healthy in the process, because that's also a struggle. was to find easy, cost-effective tips that I can offer to my patients, and that I can, because when I talk the talk, I walk the walk. So I'd like to give that inspiration. If I can do it with my busy lifestyle, anybody can do it, and anybody can fly. So listen to your gut. Sometimes need to ignore the physician when needed. But, and so that's where I wrote this book. It's called The Holistic RX, Your Guide to Healing Chronic Inflammation and Disease, and it's due to come out in October.
Great, thanks, Madiha. Jen, why don't you go ahead and share your story?
So my name is Jen Kozek, Jen Guistra-Kozek, my big long name, Italian name. I am a licensed professional counselor, so that's my profession. I worked for 15 years, mainstream medical model, working alongside psychiatrists, treating everything from ADHD to bipolar disorder to you name it. Always kind of questioning why we weren't testing for things like thyroid problems before putting somebody on a potentially dangerous anxiety medication. But the doctor, who was I to question the medical doctors who had many, many more years of medical training than I? But the light bulbs were sort of starting to go off. And then I would see these young children coming in and getting medicated for all of these things, and they'd have behavioral problems, and they were being put on antipsychotics, and then the antipsychotics were causing constipation, and then they were being put on more medication for that, and it was a hamster wheel. And I also recognized that the pharmaceutical sales reps that were coming in were kind of talking about the efficacy of certain medications over others, and then I noticed that psychiatrists were basically prescribing the medication of the rep that was there that week. So I started to go, Then I had my own children. I have a son who's now 11, but he was born premature and started developing ADHD-type symptoms pretty early on. He was kind of an active child, but then he had very low energy at other times. He was going into fits of rage over absolutely nothing. He had a lot of gross motor, fine motor delays and other issues happening. I didn't want to say autism because, oh no, he doesn't have that. And and the pediatrician would say, oh, he's a boy. But the mom knows this is not a boy. Like something was really wrong. He didn't walk until he was almost 2.5. He couldn't get himself out of a wicker basket. He didn't have a motor plan. He had a speech apraxia. He had hardly any speech, and he was 4 years old. So at that point, I said, I need to go do something else. I have to figure out what's wrong, but I didn't know where to turn. And so my aunt, who happens to be a champion of alternative medicine, said to me, I think he has autism. And, my immediate reaction was like, no, he doesn't. Total denial at that moment. And then she kept saying, I think he has food sensitivities. I think he has nutritional deficiencies. There's something wrong with him. He doesn't look well. And who is she to tell me? Like, she's never even had her own kids. So, I didn't listen. And then she sent me an article about malabsorption issues in children with apraxia and autism. And it took me about 2 months to read it. She sent me, message upon message upon message, one of those really annoying relatives. And I just kept ignoring her until one day I read the article and I was like, oh my goodness, there's something I can do for him. And so I immediately went to a GI specialist in my state and started to read things on the internet for moms who found alternative treatments helpful. And I brought with all these studies, I was going on PubMed, and I was finding that there were studies about this done. These were the studies that the medical community was apparently not reading. And so I brought them to this GI specialist, and I said, what do you think of this? And he said, I think you're reading too much. I think you need to get off the internet. And someone said this morning, that was the fuel. I'm so grateful for that guy right now because that was the fuel that was screw you, I'm going to find a doctor that will listen to me. And that's where my journey took off. So we found a naturopath, and we're talking about integrative functional medicine teams, health coaches, naturopathic physicians, chiropractors, cranial sacral therapists should all be working in the same office together with medical doctors and physicians because we would get a lot further. And we started doing testing on him, and lo and behold, he had gluten sensitivity, dairy sensitivity, gut issues, he had GI problems. She's like, how often does he go to the bathroom? I'm like, oh, every 5 days. Why, that's not normal? And then I don't realize that other kids that also have autism, or it's an autoimmune disorder. It's Alzheimer's in a 5-year-old, right? So we really start to have to treat these issues as that. So we got him to a point of well, and he's doing amazing, and he's 11. And so I knew I had to write like a pamphlet to help other moms like get to their journey. And then Sandy Hook, Connecticut happened, the massacre in Sandy Hook. I live 10 miles from Sandy Hook, so I started, as a trauma therapist, I started treating first responders of that tragedy, family members of that tragedy, and it was through that that I realized, what are we doing for Adam Lanza? Because Adam Lanza is on the spectrum, and many of the children in these, these lone shooters that have this vacant look in their eye, it's a nutritional deficiency. It's something going on biomedically, and why aren't we looking to find out what is going on with these kids? And so I knew I had to reach out to the families, so I started my Facebook page. It's called Healing ADHD and Asperger's Without Hurting. And I have about 27,000 followers now that follow me from all around the world, and I blog every single day. And parents have actually written to me and said their kids are back in school, that they had to homeschool them because they had violent tendencies, because they were on medication that was causing more psychosis. And so this is how my mission began. And so when we all fill out those yellow cards, like what could we do? Like, we can all do something. And I knew I had to do something from that tragedy. So that's how this all started. So then my book came out in end of 2014, Healing Without Hurting, Treating ADHD, Autism, Apraxia, naturally and effectively without harmful medication. So that's my story.
Thanks, Jen. So one of the things that is a common thread here is that you either found other moms or other individuals in your own journey, or they have now found you after you have learned something about your own family's health. So it's 2017, and if you think back to it, I got my first iPhone in 2008. That's not even a decade ago. And the internet was just, a decade before that. It was barely really making its way around. So access to information is so new. There is a network of moms out there, highly motivated. It's a key constituency in the healthcare system that's completely underutilized, untapped. But all of you found that to be an important part of your journey. Can you talk a little bit about the Moms Network and what it did for you, or why you think the Moms Network is important today in a way that it wasn't even just 10 years ago? Do you want to talk about that, Amy?
I don't know that it wasn't important 10 years ago, but it was harder to get
15.
moms together before. I think now with technology, it's so much easier. Like Morgan's disease, there are only about 2,000 kids in the U.S. with it. So you could go your whole life and never meet somebody with it. But now we know hundreds of kids with her disease, and the parents are all connected. So when Morgan has any kind of symptom, problem, new treatment option, anything, the first place I go is the moms on our social media site and ask them, hey, has anybody done this? Have you seen this? Have you heard of this? Before we think of calling a doctor or anyone else, we go to the moms. Moms will do anything, as somebody said. We've all run marathons, done triathlons. I mean, we've done anything we can to raise money, because if we don't raise the money, we know that there's no research that's going to be happening.
Do you want to comment on that, Moms?
Yeah, so like I said, the moms were the ones that actually taught me, the most about what I learned about health and wellness, and now I can just kind of pay it forward. And, so I have my Facebook page, the book page, but I also have like a support page of moms that don't want to medicate their children. And collectively, like, we can give each other ideas, we can share ideas, and we're the CEOs of our health, of our families. We talk about things like genetically modified food. That's destroying our healthy gut biome. We talked about healthy gut biomes this morning. I didn't realize like how much toxic food I was. I look back at videos, I'm like, oh my goodness, like I didn't realize that like food dye was made out of petroleum. I learned that on a website, on a Facebook page. And then I was like, oh, this starts to make sense why kids have hyperactivity. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's probably one of the worst things that could have happened to us, and one of the best things that could have happened to us with social media. So.
Did you want to comment on that, Madiha? Okay.
I want to add one more thing, actually. So I think one thing the Moms Network has done for us also is there are a lot of things that the medical system doesn't really know how to tell you. And so things like how to deal with school and teachers when you're going to be missing a lot of school, or how to come up with a 504 plan for your school. So the moms really taught us not just the medical side where we get a lot of information, but how to live, and things about diet and other things that you never would hear from the doctors.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too, because if you think about what was there before there was a healthcare system, what was there? Who was responsible for health? right? Who managed that, who drove that, and who made sure that their family was healthy? Oftentimes it's the moms. So if you think about why we're in this predicament right now, why we have so many sick people, I mean, my area of focus is in children, and we have more than half of American children with some kind of diagnosed chronic condition. Why are we in that situation in the first place? And if you start digging into the root causes and the reasons for all of these kids being sick, you realize it has a lot to do with what you talked about, Madiha, which is lifestyle, what we're eating, what we're drinking, what we're thinking, what we're doing with our kids every single day, and who has the best handle on that and the best ability to change that, and that's the moms. Do you want to talk about that role and why that's so important and so overlooked today? Can you tell me why you think moms are not utilized that way?
So, because, I went through the traditional medical system, we were taught that doctors are it. We know everything. And, let me put this back into perspective, that as a doctor, right, we were seeing 20 to 25 patients in a day so otherwise we're going to get penalized. And I was looked down upon if I spent any more time with the patient. On top of that it's such a broken system that, I can code higher for seeing them for a little bit less time and still I can get more money out of the insurance companies by just prescribing you a medication, those seeing you less. So doctors, we were doing, I'm a family physician, so we are supposed to be the cornerstone of prevention in health, right? Like, this is, who do you go to learn about prevention? And who do you go to learn about how to heal disease? That's what we were taught. The family physician is supposed to help you put it all together. How are you supposed to implement this in your lifestyle? My brother's an interventional cardiologist. My sister's a pediatric ICU physician. I have every doctor in my family. I have another sister that's a Harvard psychiatrist. And not a single one of us was taught one class of nutrition. We were not taught any stress management. And that is ridiculous, especially where we were just taught that there was no correlation between our lifestyles and very limited correlation in what we ate to how we feel. And so I was stuck in that hamster wheel, right? And just to get by, and until I became a mom. Because that's when when you have this gift in front of you that you are supposed to take care of and cherish. And I did not want to give this child the same misery that I have been seeing in all my patients. But then I'm like, I totally got this because I'm a family physician. I do well child checks all day long. Very funny. I had no clue what to feed my child to keep him healthy. I had no clue what to look for. I had none of that. Even though I was doing hundreds of well child visits and trying to do preventative visits, right? But I had no clue on how to actually keep a child healthy. That's ridiculous. And so especially with that knowledge, then I really dove into it. And then I researched and thereby my book and my Facebook page. But it was that me becoming a mother that really switched that, because I did not want to put the misery on this child of what I had seen in all my patients. And so that's where I learned a lot of that from the moms. Mm-hmm. I learned how to live a healthy lifestyle from my mothers. Because literally I'm like, okay, Mom, what am I supposed to do with this child when it cries? Like, what, is this normal? Even that, it's really scary.
And that experience reminds me of how frequently people opt out of the healthcare system entirely because they're not getting the answers for their kids. So time and time again, you hear the stories of a mother who went from this doctor to that doctor to this doctor to that doctor, got no answers, or maybe got a prescription that wasn't helping or had terrible side effects, and then you hit a wall and then you opt out. And Jen, I know you probably have a lot of experience with parents who have opted out and then end up in your lap and talk to you about your experience recovering your child from autism and try to learn from you for that reason.
Right. They've kind of given up on mainstream medicine completely, and then they become their own doctors, which is also very, very dangerous. You know, like throughout my whole book, I always say, you know, find the physicians that will listen to you. Everyone's bio-individual, you know. So the moms are on there. The dangerous part about this is the moms are on there saying, you know, just give vitamin B, just give amino acids, da-da-da. This is dangerous. Very, very dangerous. We need doctors that understand this so that they can be educating their patients. But, you know, one of the things I learned through this journey is, you know, in 1930, the Academy of Pediatrics was created as an independent forum. So, you know, for the wellness and health of children. And when you look at the sponsors of the American Pediatrics, it's Monsanto, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Coca-Cola. I mean, so seriously, like they're going to educate us about the health and wellness of our children, like not happening. So, you know, again, social media can be fantastic, but at the same time, you know, they come to me and like they want me to be their doctor, and I'm like, I'm not a doctor, like go see her, like, you know. So I had the privilege of actually working as a licensed therapist now in a wellness center with a naturopath, with acupuncturists, with chiropractors, because it has to be an integrative team. Like I'm sort of like a therapist for trauma, and I'm also a coach. And that's what I'll do. I'll coach people through the process. I'll help them find physicians, because sometimes that could be difficult too. And not all natural doctors are all created equal either, just like a regular doctor. You know, you have to know who to look for, what tests are going to be performed, and all of that. So, you know, it's very, very important for lots of reasons that we start getting on the same page with this.
So one of the things that I think is really important for parents is that ability to take charge of their family's health and understanding, as you described, nutrition and understanding the importance of nutrition. But there are so many families, I think, that are comfortable outsourcing their family's health, outsourcing their own health. And what is it about, you know, is it fear? Why is it that we are so comfortable with outsourcing our health and just only trusting what the doctor says and not making any choices unless we're validated by a doctor?
I think we're taught that way from being a child. I mean, you think about it, you go to the doctor, you're never once given a pencil and a piece of paper to even write down notes at the doctor's office. You just go in, oh, shut up, be quiet, sit down and do what they tell you to do. So I don't think people really think to question it until something happens that propels them forward. You know, in Morgan's case, she got mad in the hospital. In my case, I had to find some way to treat her before 3 months because I didn't know what would happen in 3 months. So I think once something lights the fire, it changes you. But I think we have to teach people to do it from the beginning.
To stop outsourcing their health.
Well,
So
to at least start being involved in understanding it and being the owner of your own health from childhood.
So what advice would you give to a parent who has a child with a new diagnosis, whether it's autism or whether it's a rare autoimmune disease or whether it's even asthma or a life-threatening food allergy? What advice would you give to that parent?
Well, I recommend to read every single book on the subject. Go to the literature, the scientific literature that is there, that again I say that the doctors aren't reading because it's there. I mean, my book has over 150 medical journal references from esteemed hospitals, research centers, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm always wary of any science that's actually funded by the people that are going to benefit from the results. And so we have to like go outside of that. You know, so I sat on my bed and I literally had 30 books. I drove my husband absolutely crazy. He's like, can we go to bed now? I'm like, absolutely not. You know, we are on a mission. You know, somewhere on Facebook I saw, you know, moms, you know, do more research than the FBI. And I have to tell you, I could have had like 6 doctorates by now, honestly. Like, I should have. Like, I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, this could have been my thesis. Like, I don't know. Anyway. So, you know, as moms, like, we have to start listening to our gut feeling. We know. Like, in the book, I talk about the times that I was with physicians that I just wish I would have just listened to my gut feeling when he wanted to do this or that or, you know, whatever. I didn't, and it cost me, and it cost my family. And so I had to switch that, and now I have, and thank goodness. And I'm here as that cheerleader for everybody else.
I think that obviously when you're given this child with a diagnosis, as moms, as parents, you want to do everything that you possibly can to save this child, right? And we try to go to the physician. They offer, you know, advice, their biased advice. And then what happens is that we start looking into all of these different approaches. And yeah, this is where listening to moms is like sometimes a good thing, sometimes it can lead you down a rabbit hole. But what I'm known as a doctor of last resort. So patients that have come to me have spent thousands and even hundreds of thousands of dollars on alternative approaches and conventional approaches and still have gotten nowhere. And this is where all of these approaches are great in their own realm, but focus on also, again, do all the research, but start with the basics. Start with what you're feeding them, start with what you're putting on their bodies, start with their stress levels. 80% of the complaints that come to primary care physicians are due to stress. We need to manage that appropriately. Start with how are they optimistic, are they pessimistic? We got to change that. We have to start off with lifestyle. Cheapest, easiest, cost-effective way to improve health. Instead of running a marathon and all of those other realms, start here and then use those as conjunctive.
You know what I was going to say? I mean, exactly. I mean, and I think the reason we don't is because we're in a fear-based society. There is so much fear. I mean, and this is, how we all get controlled. It's fear, right? So you have, and everyone's as equally responsible for it. The teacher's like, you have to medicate this kid. He's going to flunk out of school, or da-da-da. So it starts with that person, and then you hear from the grandmother like, oh, you have to listen to yourself. And so I think it's the fear, and I think we all need to meditate, calm down. And I put it on my Facebook page a couple days ago, a natural sunscreen, because the chemicals in traditional sunscreens will probably give you cancer, no joke, before the sun will. And so I put up this natural sunscreen recipe, which included zinc oxide, which is one of the best things for your skin, to protect you from the sun. By the way, we need the sun, so we should stop lathering all of us up so quickly. But secondly, has essential oils, and you should have seen the fear. Oh, my child's gonna burn, this is terrible advice, da-da-da. Where are they getting that from? This is old medicine, folks. This is not new. When I was doing research for the book and treating Evan, I found a book in my basement. It was my husband's great-great-grandfather's from 1896. It was one of the books that I guess sat on the end of a coffee table or side table when a doctor came to do house visits. And I have to tell you, it's all in there. All the remedies are in there from our ancestors. It's time we go back to the root and go back to treating. All medicine, by the way, comes from the plant. And we basically throw it into a lab, add a whole bunch of chemicals, hence the side effect. It's time we go back to the root, the stem, the plant, because that's where the healing is, coming from the earth. So, I was astounded. They used terms like bound bowels and deranged minds. So it was interesting. And they talked about dark shade vegetables. They talk about detoxification and magnesium being the biggest anti-stress mineral and how we're all mineral deficient. So it was quite eye-opening.
And specifically also, again, just side note that I really want to emphasize is that now the new research is all pointing to the microbiome. So make sure that comes up in a discussion with your doctor, with your integrative physician. I want to heal the microbiome. 70 to 80% of your immune system lies in the gut. And because chronic inflammation is the root cause of your chronic disease, we need to target your immune system. And the house of your immune system lies in the gut. And so focusing on those foods that irritate, getting those out, giving the nourishment back in, optimizing it the best we possibly can, along with all those other lifestyle, is key to regaining health.
If I talk to someone who had a child diagnosed with a new disease, I would tell them first to get all of your medical records, all of them, and keep getting them every time you go. If you have to get them by paper, however you get them, because there will be a lot of information in there, maybe not relevant today, but it could be relevant 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And sometimes there's information you can Google and find out more just from reading those medical records. So first of all, I would say that. Second, I would say find some kind of foundation, advocacy group, patient group. They usually fund research. They'll have research studies that it's a launch point to get in, because you can get overwhelmed looking at all the research, but you got to start somewhere. So those research groups usually have some pretty concise summaries that you can start with and then dig in more as you get and learn more. And then I would say your child needs to talk to other children who have that condition. In a lot of cases, maybe not all, but for example, when Morgan was diagnosed, she didn't know that she was going to have to be on medicine for a long time. She thought, you just took it for a cold or antibiotic or whatever, and you were done. And so when she met the girl that, the first person she met, she came out and she said, she's still taking medicine. And I was like, oh, she didn't realize this was like a long-term haul. She was only 11. And so, but that girl really taught her a lot about sunscreen and how to deal with other kids when they ask why you're in the hospital or things like that, that she would have probably never asked me, but she asked this other kid.
So as you all were talking, I was reminded of, again, that mom network. And one of the things that I learned in the mom network, because I interestingly had a different kind of situation where I had kids who had health symptoms but lacked a diagnosis. And so that was actually one of the best things that ever happened to our family, is that we had kids who had health issues, but they didn't get put in a box. So what happens today, very commonly, is that you're put in a box based on your diagnosis. And one of the things the moms that were sort of out there, looking for answers for their kids taught me was that doesn't actually mean anything. Maybe Madiha, could you talk a little bit about how diagnosis doesn't matter and what I mean by that?
So we are taught to compartmentalize everything, right? My brother's an interventional cardiologist. We're only going to deal with the heart. Thank you. So this is all we're going to deal with. Not even just the fact that, as a family physician, I see everything, right? We were taught in residency. Now, I graduated in 2010, at the end of 2010 from residency, so only like 6.5 years ago. And what's really scary is we are taught that you are only going to deal, when a patient comes to us in that 15 minutes, we're supposed to solve everything and Band-Aid it all, that what is your symptom? I'm only going to listen to one of your complaints. And that is ridiculous, because even just by that one complaint, what doctors do is that they start putting you in a box just due to that one complaint. Oh, I have severe fatigue. Okay, you must be depressed. So because sometimes that's, because we can't really treat fatigue, we can treat depression, right? And so this is where taking it as a grain of salt is key. Because again, it all has all these chronic ailments, no matter what you're dealing with, from your head to your toes, chronic issues have chronic inflammation at its root cause. And so again, that box, when in a holistic health, that box no longer exists. Why? Because, we have all of these symptoms, but guess what? All of their root causes, because conventional medicine teaches us to treat anxiety, we're going to treat you with a medication. We have depression, we're going to treat you with a medication. You have an autoimmune disease, we're going to give you like a medication. If you sleep issues, a medication. But then all of it has chronic inflammation as its root cause. So then targeting that chronic inflammation is key. This is where when patients come to me, they're put in these boxes and they're giving all of this diagnoses. They have probably a list of 40 issues. My first patient that I ever saw that changed my entire outlook on life was a 31-year-old with 9 autoimmune diseases, along with digestive issues, along with menstrual issues, along with mood and like all of these issues, right? And I could have taken that and like, oh my God, what am I going to do with all of these symptoms? Just got to get to the root cause, chronic inflammation. And then just by applying these lifestyle skills and healing and addressing chronic inflammation, we not only heal one issue, but you heal them all simultaneously. This is why in holistic medicine, when we actually look at the root cause of chronic disease, that box no longer exists.
Jen, did you want to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. When we walked into the naturopath's office, my son was 5, and we did a 2-hour exam. Who is giving a 2-hour exam? She is. She looked at his fingernails. She looked at his head, the top of his head. He had cradle cap, always had cradle cap. He was almost 5, and I'd asked the regular physicians, what's going on with the cradle cap? He goes, oh, well, he's from Italian descent. He probably has extra oil glands. He'll probably have acne as a teenager. Don't worry about it. And I said, what? And so we saw the naturopath, and she's like, oh, he's not speaking, he has constipation, and he has cradle cap. Okay, we're going to give him a calcarb, a calcarea carbonica, which is a homeopathy remedy that's been around for thousands and thousands of years and practiced everywhere but here. And basically, within 3 days, he was talking, right? So, I mean, talking, he wasn't conversational yet. We had a way to go. You know, when I say talking, let's not get carried away. But there was improvement, and his cradle cap was going away. And those little bumps on the side of his arms that, a lot of people actually have, and you go to a regular doctor and they say, oh, just put some steroid cream on it. Well, this is an internal thing. For Evan, it was gluten sensitivity, and it was an amino acid deficiency, which is very, very common in our children today because they're very malnourished. We have a lot of obesity and everything because these kids are, they're starving. And so many people say, well, my kids won't eat anything. If I start them on this restrictive diet, they already don't eat anything. They're going to starve. I say, guess what? They already are starving. So let's try. And so, when you give them this food, it's like poisoning their system. So that's kind of how I had to do it. I had to look at it like I was poisoning him if I gave him one more piece of gluten. And so, we move on from,
So, sorry, go Amy. You had
I was just going to say, from a little bit different perspective, the same problems happen from compartmentalizing with different specialists. So, they don't talk to each other. So the GI might do something that's causing a problem with the dermatomyositis, is causing a problem with this, and we're going to end up with headaches and all these other things. And to try to get those doctors to talk to each other was like, a virtual impossible task. And so, the best thing that I came up with was really to let them see summaries of those records and what was happening, and not to start things without having the other providers weigh in. So.
That's the buzzword there is integration. So what you're talking about is integrating, disparate bunches of information, and that's why you created CareSync, right? Was to take all that information and put it in one place. And what the integration you're talking about was that first practice you joined, which is the integration of different fields or disciplines of healing and approaches to health. So integration is really where we're going. The thing that I was thinking about since Susanna started talking this morning, in the context of what's the fix. Susanna's book, by the way, if you haven't read it, I finished it on the plane on the way out here. It's so good. The Other Side of Impossible. And there's story after story in that book of people who found healing solutions, healed themselves all the way of chronic conditions, whether it was rheumatoid arthritis or the JIA that she talked about for her own family, or Terry Walls like she talked about today. But there's stories of kids who had life-threatening food allergies, like could have died by ingesting food, who got rid of that, cured it, healed it, recovered from it, because of these mothers typically, not always, and sometimes it's fathers, like we heard about earlier today with the cannabis. That is that perseverance, that belief in hope. So if you ask me, what's the fix? The fix is find those people who did that and tap into what they have. So whether it's the hope or the belief in the possibility of recovery. So I'd love to hear your perspective on what we could do to tap into that hope, that perseverance. I mean, you created a company to solve that integration or lack of integration problem. And Jen, you healed your child. You brought him back off of the spectrum. So what can we do? How do we fix this? How do we take those anecdotal, isolated isolated situation stories? How do we bring that into front and center mainstream medical care?
Good question. So one of the things I did was read what European moms were doing, right? So there was an article that came out, said something like French kids don't have ADHD or something like that, and it talked about their food. And then there was another book that was written, now I can't remember the name of it, but basically the gist of it was that they put nutrition and food ahead of reading and toilet training, right? So as a culture, we have completely derailed. And even as moms, I mean, I go to birthday parties and I go to picnics and it's very, very, they're like, oh no, Jen's coming. Like, it's bad. And I don't get invited sometimes, so it's not socially popular. But At the same time, like I'll bring my like gluten-free pasta and like, so my kids think they're eating the same thing and they sort of are, but it's just our version of it. And so, but it really comes from the mom. Like I think when we're so desperate, but do we have to be that desperate? It's like, why? It's like, how does an alcoholic get sober, right? They have to lose everything. They have to live on the bottom for 25 years. Like, do we have to get that sick? 1 out of 13 children now have a life-threatening food allergy. They're estimating by 2025 that 1 out of every 2 children will be on the autism spectrum. And when we talk about the autism spectrum, we're talking, like in my mind, everyone with ADHD, everyone with anxiety. Like I think we're all sort of on the spectrum, if you really want to be honest. Like we're all taking meds. Like everyone wants this quick fix. We've turned into a quick fix society that's fixing absolutely nothing. And so it's going to take a paradigm shift of consciousness. It's like it's all of us waking up to realize what we are doing, and it's a high price to pay for the way we're conducting our business in this country.
I think the key is what I love what Gandhi has to say, be the change that you wish to see in the world, right? And so if we don't change ourselves, we can't expect anything else to change, because it's like a consumer-driven product. Like, if you're gonna want it, they're gonna deliver. But the thing is, as us as consumers, we don't even want the long-term solution. We want the quick fix. And so we need to now open up our eyes to realize that this is actually a more cost-effective, long-term goal, where it starts off with us. And to bring those changes first in us, and then our children, and then the next generation. So because, when I talk the talk, I walk the walk. I don't, the things that I tell my patients, I do myself. And so just by that inspiration and that hope, because I know it's what I think Kim said earlier was, like the doctor, oh, so what am I going to eat? And they're just handing them because they had no idea themselves of what they're going to eat. Here's like a printed out copy. Like when a patient comes and asks me what I'm going to eat, I'm like, oh, let me go ahead and tell you, and let me actually make it for you. This is so much fun, And that's the kind of stuff that if we do it ourselves, and if we should be that role model, we then create that ripple effect that can mean so much.
So that all sounds amazing, and that sounds like what we need to do. But how does that help, again, the mom whose child just gets diagnosed with something and walks into their physician's office and the physician says, well, you can change a diet, but there's no evidence to support that it'll do anything, and it's too hard, so don't bother. What do you do?
Oh, you get that a lot, actually. I have a very good friend of mine whose son has leukemia and is going through the traditional treatment. And I nudge her and I said, well, just go ask, like, what kind of foods you can. And she's like, she came back. I said, so what did they say? They said, oh, diet doesn't really matter. I was like, oh, goodness, we have a long way to go. We have a very, very long way to go. But, what you said, though, was really important when you said, be the cheerleader. Like, how to get our kids on board, too, is by being the example in our own family. And if you try to get one child well in a family, you're going to fail. Right? It's a family affair because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. My husband was like very resistant about like going gluten-free and like trying a healthier lifestyle and like not eating, genetically modified food and all of that. And he developed thyroid condition. And then all of a sudden he was like, oh, wait a minute. My wife has a book. Maybe I should like pay attention to what it says. And, he avoided all his medication. Just going on iodine and getting off of gluten. His thyroid went totally back into normal range. So it becomes a family, a thing. And, when we get excited, like when I'm like, look, guys, let's make these, organic, gluten-free cookies, yay! They're like, yay! That's how you get them on board. If you're like, oh, this is so hard, and I can't do it, then the kids go, oh, this is so hard. They follow us, right? They totally do.
And the only way right now that we can change the medical system is by having the data there, because the only way that holistic medicine will enter mainstream medicine is if there's a study to back it up, which there's multiple studies out there, obviously, as we all know. But to have a child, be documented, their recovery, their healing, and not even scientifically, but through media, because you cannot just unwatch that, right? We can ignore scientific studies, but you cannot ignore what you just saw a child heal. And so this is where I know I love the Documenting Hope Project. It took what I was trying to do by myself to like an exponential degree, because that's how you're gonna change that doctor. That is how we're gonna change that practitioner, is by slowly but surely showing them the data, then integrating that into their practice, but also specifically for mothers when they go to their doctor, always trust your gut. And don't second guess yourself.
So I just want to explain what Madiha addressed. There is a project called the Documenting Hope Project that is essentially a pilot recovery program, meaning it's taking a small group of children who have a diagnosed chronic condition, and it's supporting them holistically, giving them personalized, individualized therapies, changing their nutrition, doing lifestyle interventions, and documenting the changes that occur to their health over the course of 18 months. It's the purpose is to take the stories in Susanna's book, and one of which, again, you heard this morning, and take them out of the realm of story and into the realm of science. So from stories to science, as Kim Screen, who's sitting in the audience here, coined. And that is, actually, we have a short video that we could show about that project. It's just taking off now. But what I want you to, as you're watching this, what I want you to pay attention to is the voices that are most powerful and most impactful in this short video. So, and Bert's gonna set that up for us now. We're just showing you a snippet of a longer video if you're interested in learning more about it. It's documentinghope.com, and you can see the whole thing on there.
And you'll notice that these moms and these fathers did not give up. They trusted their instinct. They went with their gut. They sought out an integrative approach. Okay. Yeah.
The government says autism is showing up in children more than before.
1 in 50 school children has a form of autism.
Asthma rates rising dramatically over the past decade.
More than 1 in 7 children in the U.S. receiving a diagnosis of ADHD.
Numbers from the CDC have steadily increased in the past decade.
In the last 30 years, obesity rates for kids have tripled.
Frightening to parents to hear those dramatic numbers.
It may reduce the life expectancy of this generation of children and diminish their quality of life.
Our kids are sick. They're screaming out. They want help.
He still didn't have a single word. He was drooling. He was rubbing his head against the carpet. He was pushing himself into walls.
His eyes swelled shut. He was covered with hives from head to foot.
Probably around 14, 15 months, all that language disappeared.
From all that I can see, it looks like we've got a child here with pervasive developmental delay.
Noah, you keep holding your stomach. Does your side hurt?
Having a child with autism, it's not what you envision.
Unfortunately today, too many of our children, by analogy, function as canaries in the coal mine. They are teaching us that something is deeply out of order, deeply imbalanced, deeply in need of understanding, and largely lacking in therapy.
I think the first step to transforming this problem is to understand it. And we have not done a great job at that in healthcare.
We know that when our bodies are hit with toxins, it interferes with our biochemistry. They are not prepared for handling the 85,000 toxic chemicals on the market.
Whatever is lacking of essential nutrients that the body cannot make is going to control that whole system of cellular biology.
The brain is a physical organ of the body, and its health depends on the health of the cells. And when we address the body problems, the brain problems start to resolve.
What's wrong? Most of the pediatricians I went to see basically told me there was no chance for recovery.
Your son was just born with this, and it would be best for you and your husband to just accept your new normal.
I knew Ben was going to get better the day I got the diagnosis. He's not going to get better. No, I'm not really hearing that.
When you tell a person that there's no hope, that their child will always be this way, that there's nothing you can do about it, that's not science. That's a misuse of statistics.
The doctors said, no, your boy will have autism for a very long time, but my mother didn't give up. She kept on thinking of ways to try and get rid of autism.
There's an abundance of intriguing individual cases, or what we call anecdotes. They cry out to be better studied and documented.
So to think that just a few short years ago, he had to be in a room with an air purifier plugged in to his nebulizer, flash forward to now, and he loves to hike and he loves to be outside. He couldn't do that a couple years ago.
People say kids can't recover. Well, they do recover. I've seen it. I've seen kids recover from autism, from ADHD, from Tourette's. I've seen it.
I feel like his true personality is coming through again. He has so many friends. He's got more best friends than I can count.
When he's doing BMX at the track and I'm sitting there watching him, come on, go, go! I just know that there's no limits to what he can do.
So that's just the beginning portion of a longer trailer you can see online. But one of the voices you hear and hear again and again in the end is the mothers, and they didn't give up. Those are the voices in Susanna's book. That's Jen's voice. That's your voice. It's the mothers don't give up. They just keep going. So, if you ask what's the fix for the healthcare system, that's not the question. The question is what's the fix for our health? Why is our health the way it is right now? So I think, one of the things we ought to be doing is making sure we're listening to these people, because they have the answers. Many of them have found answers for their kids or are creating new approaches, for instance, like your CareSync, for dealing with their children's health issues. And they are one of the most motivated constituencies out there. So that is something that needs to be tapped into. So I think we are probably getting around the time for questions. So are there any questions that people have? Yeah.
One microphone. I might have to pass back and forth. Yep.
Sure. So I know this panel is about, moms being important, obviously very in charge of healthcare, but then in families, and you think about how society is, oftentimes moms are doing primarily all the emotional labor and all the other kinds of labor. Have you guys thought at all, or have any thoughts on how to encourage dads or men to be more participatory in that process?
That's a really good question. I happen to be very, very lucky in that my husband is completely supportive and totally on board. But, we see this. We actually see divorces and things where there's actually sabotage of each other's efforts as well. So, it's an important question to tackle. Some dads, though, are more interested in watching, the videos than they are reading a book. And so, I know on my website, I have a video of, a talk that I do, and, so there's other ways to kind of get the dads. I think it's an educational piece for them, because I think they're not wired necessarily to be completely nurturing. Some are, my husband being one of those, but not every. So we have to kind of bring them into the loop and educate them, because they want to help their children. They're fixers They are fixers. So if we give them something to do, look this up or help me find this, or, my husband's actually my shopper. He does a better job than I do, going to 4 different stores on one day to just try to get the sales prices and stuff. So that's his contribution. So we have to bring them in, because a lot of times they're just waiting for us to ask. And as a psychotherapist, a lot of times we just think, well, if my husband loved me, they'd know what we need. No, not so much. We actually have to say, okay, this is what we're going to do now, and get them, because they're in charge of other things in the home. So it's about because they really want to heal their children too. Like I remember like sitting up reading the books and like reading sentences to him and being like, did you know that blah, 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 blah. So slowly but slowly.
And I think, again, knowledge is power. And so to like the dads that I see, I really go through and I discuss let me show you what's going on with your child. Let me show you, all these factors that play a role into it. And let's work together, because again, stress also causes problems. So let's work together to then solve that underlying problem with the education.
And I was going to add too, like my husband needs to see data, right?
Yep.
So like the naturopath, like I had a really great naturopath that actually did a lot of testing. Psychiatry is actually the only branch of medicine that never does one test lab. But we don't realize that there are neurotransmitter tests that we could do. There are food sensitivity tests that we could do, heavy metal tests we could do. We could test the blood, we could test the poop, we could test a whole bunch of things. And so for my husband to really get on board too, it was like, here you go. Like, why can't he have gluten anymore? This is why. And he was like, oh, okay. So I think sometimes like we have to meet them where they are. And and that goes for people generally. Some people just like to see the data.
The people. And that's exactly where the data is really key. The only way that in my practice that I can get people to change is by showing them how inflamed they actually are. Right. So once they see how screwed they are, they usually change.
I think sometimes, not meaning to, moms don't really give dads a chance to be involved. So, I kind of just took over when Morgan was diagnosed, and actually I found out later that he kind of felt left out, like he couldn't contribute. And so that was actually one of the first success stories for CareSync. Is I kind of felt, and my family really, I was the only one that could ever take her to the doctor or take care of her, because I was the only one that really knew all of her meds and knew all that stuff was going on. And once we summarized all that and it was always current in CareSync, then my husband could take her to the doctor, or my parents could take her to the doctor, which was really freeing for me, and it also let them contribute and feel like they were part of it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great.
And then I would also say, if you get dads with other dads, then they'll usually get involved. So when we went to the Cure JM conference with other parents, they had a dads group, and then they kind of dealt in their own way, and now they do dad stuff, other fundraising things and other things as well.
Yeah, sorry. So how are we going to impact the health system itself and physicians? Because what you are talking about are patients and your families, but how are we going to get that message to the health system in general and help them to change their practices?
My example is probably a little bit different than probably other ones, but for example, with Morgan's disease, it's so rare that one of the biggest problems is it takes over a year usually for people to get diagnosed. And so by the time they've had that amount of time, their disease is a lot worse than it would have been if it had been treated earlier. So we've created now an educational brochure and a continuing education credit course for physicians that are all about JM. But then we're using the power of stories, which I think are really important to make it stick with physicians. So having a Morgan walk into a pediatrician's office with a brochure and tell her story, they're going to remember that a lot more than something they got in the mail or some class they went to. So I think stories can really help. We've seen that over and over as Morgan speaks. The physicians really relate to her stories, and they can take it back more than somebody preaching to them or something else.
Because I'm very well versed with this physician population, living with them, and usually your family is the most critical. But right now, currently, I teach like a lot of physicians, and there's not a single physician that I have talked to that says what you're doing doesn't make any sense. And why? Because of the fact that you just go back to lifestyle. And we say, because we are taught that lifestyle is important. We just don't know what in lifestyle is important. And so when you talk to your physician and say, I'm trying these lifestyle tips, usually then they're more on board. And like right now specifically, I have pediatricians that are calling me and like, how do I heal my children? My brother-in-law the other day was like, he's a gastroenterologist at a Memorial Day weekend. He's like, by the way, how do you heal the gut? And it's really really scary that where physicians are not taught, but we are open to the lifestyle. It's where, when you add too many supplements or that realm is what we're really wary about, because again, it's a fear of the unknown. We don't know how that supplement's going to interact with what we're doing. And so this is why we just shrug it off. But when we open up the talk about lifestyle, we're like, oh, okay, if you want to try this, there's no harm in trying that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, physicians are fantastic with what they do. They're fantastic. They're well-educated, very, good people. But we have to kind of, as a society, get the ego out of the way. Because when we do that, we allow other practitioners to show up in our practice. And we need the insurance companies on board with all of these treatments. Because right now, it's very expensive. I mean, I'm lucky that I have the resources to be able to afford some of these things, like cranial sacral therapy. It's unbelievable. I have a client right now who is attacked at work. She worked for a correctional institution, and she was attacked, and she needed surgery on her neck. And Workman's Comp won't let her do anything holistic. She's in jeopardy of losing her benefits. It's like, well, what about cranial sacral therapy? They don't even touch you. It's energy work, and it's phenomenal. Nope. This is a problem. So they're talking about another surgery. That's going to cost that insurance company thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, where she could easily get fixed in a few sessions with a cranial sacral therapist or or a Reiki master. Or, we need more integration of services. We need, I was in the NICU with both my children, and they were in artificial nutrition for days and days and days without breast milk, without good gut biomes. They were C-sectioned. They started out a hot mess. Where was the doctors? Where was the integrative treatment team that was like, we need to give these babies probiotics and get their gut flora going to build their immune systems? Non-existent. And when I brought it up to I ran into the doctor at the hospital a couple years later, and after I wrote my book and everything, and I said, what about, she goes, oh, it's interesting. Europe is really light years ahead of us in obstetrics. We know, they already know about this stuff. Good point. We don't have really good studies on that yet. Hello, we don't need good studies. Just bring probiotics into the NICU, and my son may have had a better chance. And so, yeah. Well, right, it comes down to the money. It's all about health. It's all about wealth, not health in this country. And until that changes because of grassroots action, because parents are refusing to see doctors that don't treat holistically, it won't change. It's like the food industry won't start taking food dyes out of their food until people refuse to buy their food, and it's happening. Mars, I think is starting to put in all natural ingredients in some of their candy bars, right? It's starting to happen because we're demanding it that it does.
I wanted to add one more thing too, that physicians in the system will change when they see success. So, when I started, or we started CareSync, a lot of physicians really didn't want to give their notes to the patient. They weren't really comfortable with them reading what they wrote on their notes. But, once they see the success story of that, they're much more willing the next time. So, Morgan, the first time she had meningitis, we went to the ER and nobody knew what was going on. The second time, I had from my phone all the records from the first time, and I faxed over a summary of what was done from the ER at the table, and the doctor started her on the right treatment right away. And I think that doctor the next time will be a lot more likely to share records and to do other things because they've seen the power of it. It's not just somebody being kooky and wanting their records.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what you just said, and to answer your question, how do we get this change into the institution of the healthcare system? Consumers need to demand something different, which means you go to your doctor and you don't say, yes, thank you for the prescription. You say, how about this lab test? I read about it on PubMed, and, or you talk to other people who have, been in a similar situation and have demonstrated success. You ask them what they did, and then you bring that to your doctor and you say, listen, I'd love to be a partner with you on this whole health thing. How about we explore this together? I think when patients demand better care, the doctors will eventually respond. And there are institutions that are training physicians differently now. So there's a lot of advanced training that's going on. For instance, there's something known as the Institute for Functional Medicine, which is very expensive for physicians now because it's such a cottage little educational industry right now. But more and more physicians are flooding to get that education. Do you know why? Because their patients are asking for it. So I think the key is for patients to demand better care. Other questions?
So that kind of relates to my question. I mean, being a patient advocate or a health advocate is, in many cases, a full-time job. But much of what you've all talked about today ties into big issues and challenges around public policy and around consumer issues, consumerism generally. And I'm wondering, you know, how you've kind of compartmentalized working so focused in such a focused way as you have as patient advocates, but at the same time recognizing the importance of policy advocacy and consumer advocacy, getting companies to change how they disclose what's in their products, or working at a policy level to make sure that we're actually, you know, seeing some of the regulatory changes that we need so that we know what we're consuming, for example.
Personally, I worked in the policy industry. I was on more committees that I could count for years and years and years, and thought I was going to drive change that way. And finally just got tired of waiting, and that's when we started CareSync, because there isn't a perfect standard or great data transfer mechanism. There are good ones, but it's not perfect. But we just use humans in the middle. We have nurses and health assistants that help translate what's missing, and every day it gets closer and closer and closer, and then we use as an example to the policymakers to push the change. So I kind of think you can't just wait for, if you sit in a room and deal with policy, you're never going to get anywhere, in my opinion.
We have a couple online questions. Tammy from Boston wants to know, how do we deal with food insecurity and food deserts and just the culture of food in our populations?
That's a great question. And I think it's one of the biggest rate limiting factors on this whole health revolution that we all want to see, because it does start so much with nutrition. But there are some, I love the nonprofit sector. There's a lot of good work coming out of institutions that are trying to shift the needle with regard to how people get food. One of the ones that I'm a really big fan of is something known as Wholesome Wave. It's out of Westport, Connecticut. And they've actually figured out how to get doctors to write scripts for farmers markets and get food stamps and get reimbursement to cover that. So I think the food insecurity issue, the food deserts, especially in urban areas, are a big problem. But I think that, you know, again, when consumers ask for something and push the envelope, it happens. We can't just sit idly by. We all have to be advocates for wanting better food. And that goes in hospitals, in schools, in our communities. That's about CSAs, and it's about community-supported food resources. I think we can all play a part in that. So those are big changes that need to happen to address the major food insecurity issues. But I think there's momentum moving that way.
There is, absolutely. And the two things we really need to change are the food in the lunchroom as a country. That actually, when I did research, the prisoners in this country are doing better than our kids in school. I put that's in the book. And then the second thing is our hospitals. You know, it's, you know, the types of foods that are being served to people with cancer, people with any type of illness, is causing the illness. And the you know, all the sponsors of all these foods that are in the, you know, that wear all their, you know, their pink ribbons and all of this, are feeding into what's causing it in the first place. So this whole like ribbon for cure thing drives me crazy. And so it has to start with recognizing that there's a huge problem, like in our food supply. You know, I think it's going to go back to doing co-ops. Like there's more co-ops popping up, farmers markets, sustainable food in communities. Like we're going to have to go back to, you know, basically raising our own chickens and growing our own vegetables. I mean, that's what it's coming down to. Or we can change it now, but we're running out of time.
Do we have time for one more?
We have one more online question. I think this will be the last one. We talked about it a little bit, but Mighty Casey wants to know, how can low-income parents help their kids? A lot of these tests, a lot of these things you're talking about, how do low-income families do the same thing?
So this approach, especially even low-income families, it's all about getting down to the basics. And I'm going to keep on saying that. Nutrition, when we stop eating the junk and focus our money on just the wholesome foods, you guys will notice that they'll start eating less. Like, for example, a slice of bread. When you guys go to the restaurants, what do they give you first? Bread. Like the fancy restaurants, they give you bread. Why is that? It's because of the fact that it inhibits leptin, which then makes you eat more. So when we eat processed carbs, it actually makes us eat more in the long run, spending more than actually going down to the whole foods. Because when we eat our healthy fats or our vegetables that has all that fiber in it, all of that really keeps you satiated. So for example, I live in a house with 4 boys, right? And I can be either in the kitchen all day long, spending a lot, but technically when I give them real quality food that fulfills their body's needs, they don't eat as much. And therefore I'm spending a lot less. But what happens is that we spend a lot more on foods that don't give us the nourishments, because then our body wants to eat more food. And so it's all about getting down to the basics with lifestyle, optimizing lifestyle. Again, I have all my patients start off with real foods, like making sure you have enough vegetables, your protein sources, and your healthy fats. All of those can be done from like Costco, from Walmart. These are really, Aldi now has grass-fed beef. Like these are really cheap costs, and it's like it's like the quality of the protein versus the quantity. So we just got to focus on shop in the cheaper places. The next thing also, what I've also noticed is that when you bump again, the healthy fats really help with satiation. And then, so that's like the food aspect. Then when I talk about stress management, that's cost effective. We just have to go on YouTube and learn about stress management techniques. Stress causes 80% of the complaints that come to primary care physicians. Cha-ching, no, that's free. And then also, then we talk about your social environment. We talk about, which is again, free, to optimize the people, only keeping those people close that will bring you up, all optimizing health. And then also with gratitude, just simple gratitude, saying 10 things. So this is something that I've been doing every morning with my patients. So I've been now practicing medicine for over 10 years now. And for the entire time, I start my patients off with gratitude. Why? Because of the fact that when you're grateful, it lowers inflammatory markers. They've even reversed heart failure just by gratitude. So there's things in lifestyle that we can do that are all free to optimize your health and well-being. And then when it comes down to the food, the less is actually more.
Can I just make one quick comment as a dovetail to that, which is that there is another thing that's free, that's underutilized, and that's the mother's intuition. So all of these expensive lab tests sometimes only serve to validate what mom already knew, or dad. Example, your child gets a stomach ache every day, and you know it's dairy. You just know it, but you keep feeding them because the doctor told you it's not dairy, it's not allergic to dairy, it's fine. And you go and expend, $400 on an expensive test validating it, and you're like, I knew it! If you listen to your gut, you wouldn't have had to spend that $400. Another free thing.
And the other thing is, we get caught up in the perfectionism of having to be perfect cooks. We don't, all right? And so we can just go back to the basics. Like, if you just make a sweet potato, and you just make some grilled chicken, and you just, make some broccoli, that's it. Like, that's the meal. Like, sometimes the kids will have a little bit of rice, and we'll get, like, organic black beans and organic salsa. That's dinner. Like, it was cheap. It was easy. It was quick. The other thing is, like, the lifestyle today, we can't really, cook healthy food. It takes too long. It's because we're too wrapped up into how complicated we're not gourmet cooks. We don't need to be. And, the hamburger helper, for example, what are we really saving time doing? Like, we still have to boil the water. We still have to actually brown the, cook the meat. So really, what are we saving? What the package of chemicals that we're pouring on top of the meat, instead of just taking paprika and cumin out of the cabinet, which is actually has medicinal properties. We all have to get back to using herbs in our cooking. So I mean, these is all, it enhances the flavor of the food. It's delicious. The kids' palate changes. And my kids, the other day, they needed a Pringles can for school. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. We don't eat Pringles. So we stopped at like a gas station, and I got got a can of Pringles. I dumped it all in the garbage except for 2. I gave 1 to each of them. I said, here, try it. Like, this is disgusting. This tastes like a box of chemicals. I'm like, right, because you want them on board, right? And when their palate changes, they do. And when you taste it, if you haven't eaten it in a while and you go back and taste it, you'd be like, we call this food? This is food-like. This is not food. And also, processed good food is more expensive. A lot of people go and then they start getting Annie's this, and processed healthy food is very expensive. Just go buy whole food.
I don't know if the question was just about food, but there are also things related to other parts of care. So, for example, nonprofits fund different clinics that have experts on diseases, and they often have transportation options to get you there, providers that will see you for no charge. So that's a really important thing. A lot of people avoid going to an expert of their disease because they're worried about cost, but there are ways to do that. And then things like CareSync and other programs, even without it, if you don't know how, somebody can help you, like CareSync. But there are all kinds of medication assistance programs, copay assistance programs, meal programs. I mean, there are a lot of different things, but you have to look for them. They don't just drop in your lap. So either get somebody to help you or search them out your own.
And how do you find those people? You can go online. It's that is a common theme for this whole conversation has been, connect with other people and other moms who have been there. So with that, that sort of concludes this session. And I just want to thank Amy and Madiha and Jen for having a great conversation here.
Thank you so much.